I should be dead. That's what I thought every time I looked at my hands. Hands that held weapons, that gripped those of dying men, that could do nothing but clench into fists as everything crumbled around me. I should be buried somewhere back. There, in the scorched lands of the north, under that red earth that smelled of gunpowder and rotting flesh. But here I am, alive, breathing, walking down a dirt road that still feels familiar even after all these years. The trees bent by the wind, the stones worn by time, even the damp smell of wet grass, all of it knows me. And I know it because I never truly left this place. I just changed bodies. I didn't tell anyone I was coming back. There was no one to tell. Black Hollow hasn't been my home for a long time. It was just the place where I was born before the war decided who I would become, before I was turned into what I am now. A man with invisible scars, with memories that won't stop bleeding. The town hasn't changed much. The streets are still narrow. The buildings still have that tired air, as if everyone here is waiting for something that will never come. People looked at me like I was a ghost walking among them. Some whispered, others made a point of looking away, as if they were afraid to recognize some part of themselves in me, as if I were a broken mirror reflecting things they'd rather forget. My past walks with me. It's in my steps, in the way I keep my head down, in how my hand instinctively reaches for the knife I no longer carry. It's strange how the body remembers things the mind tries to erase. I'd stop in the middle of the night, woken by screams that didn't come from outside, but from within me. They were old voices, faces I could no longer see clearly, but whose names still echoed perfectly. I'd catch myself repeating some of them aloud, as if that could keep them alive for one more second. Sometimes I wanted them to stop, to let me sleep, but they were what kept me human. They were the only proof that I had truly lived before, becoming a shadow. On that first night back, I sat on the porch of the old cabin where I grew up. The wood creaked like it used to, and the smell of wet pine slipped through the cracks. It was cold, but I didn't move. I stayed there, staring at the dark river cutting through the forest, and thought about how many of us died without knowing why. How many bodies were left behind, nameless, without a goodbye. I should be with them. It should have been me. And maybe that's why I can't forgive myself for being here, breathing, when so many others didn't get that chance. Maybe that's why even after everything, I'm still paying a price no one else demands. And it was on that night, while the world slept and I stayed awake, that the box arrived. No sender, no explanation, just a simple package left on the doorstep, as if someone knew exactly when I'd return. As if they were waiting for me. Inside were unread letters, faded photos, and a diary I never imagined existed. And then, in the dim light of that silent cabin, I began to read the words of a man who died before my eyes. Words that would change everything I thought I knew about myself, about the war, about why I survived. His words were there, written in a firm, almost careless handwriting, as if they'd been scribbled in a hurry, between gunfire and muffled screams. It was Callan's diary, my friend, my brother-in-arms, my heaviest guilt. I remember the last time I saw him alive, his sweaty face smeared with dirt and blood, his eyes locked on mine as he clutched his leg, torn apart by shrapnel. I remember promising I'd come back for him. I remember failing to do so. That night, the attack was relentless. The order came from above, retreat or die, and I obeyed. I left Callan behind. He didn't blame me, at least not in the words he left behind. Which made it all worse. I read those pages until dawn. Each line was like a slow, precise stab. He wrote about hope, about fear, about what it meant to trust someone even when the world was collapsing around you. He wrote about me, said he trusted me as he would trust himself, that if something happened, he wanted me to keep living, to not carry his death as a burden, but as a reminder to live for those who couldn't. Words that seemed so simple, but shook me in a way I didn't know was still possible, because I'd never let anyone say that to me, not even myself. The next morning, I left the cabin as if I were running from myself. The sun was weak, hidden behind grey clouds, and the air smelled of wet earth and old wood. I walked aimlessly, just to feel my feet touching the ground to be sure I still belonged to this world. That's when I saw her. Mara. She was at the market, talking to the butcher, her hands holding a basket of groceries. She looked older, of course, but there was something about her that remained the same, that determined look, always seeming to see through people. When she saw me, she froze. Her expression hardened. No surprise, no obvious emotion, just recognition and anger. An old, silent, but very alive anger. She knew I was here. Everyone knew by now, but she knew why. Knew I was alive, and her husband wasn't. That I was there, that I gave the order, that I survived. She didn't say anything, just turned her back and walked away as if I were an unwanted shadow, and I let her go. I had no right to call her back. I was the one who left first, the one who made the choice that left her alone. I should be dead. She probably wished I was. Maybe she still does. I went back home without saying a word to anyone. My heart was pounding heavily, as if each beat was a reminder of what I'd dragged back with me, of the pain that wouldn't leave my chest. That was the night the dreams started again, stronger, clearer. Callan appeared in them, as he always did, but this time he wasn't wounded. He was standing whole, looking at me with that crooked smile I knew so well. He didn't ask why I left him. He asked why I was still carrying all of it. "You think you should be dead?" he said. "Maybe, but you're not. So what are you going to do with that?" I woke up drenched in sweat, heart racing, and for the first time in years, I cried. I cried quietly, without making a sound, as if crying aloud might summon the ghosts that had been here for so long, as if they needed to be reminded that I was still here to suffer. But strangely, I also cried because I felt relief. Something inside me began to shift. It wasn't healing, not yet, but it was something. A beginning, a crack in the armor I'd worn since I returned. And maybe, just maybe, behind it, I was still capable of feeling something other than pain. I didn't want to read more. Not that night. I left the diary on the worn wooden table, as if it had enough weight to sink the furniture. The candlelight flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls that already knew my loneliness. I sat on the edge of the bed, hands resting on my knees, breathing deeply, trying to understand why those words had affected me so much. Maybe because, for the first time, I wasn't hearing my own accusing voice. It was the voice of someone who knew me, who trusted me, even after everything, and that hurt more than any external judgment. The next morning, I went to the cemetery. It had been years since I'd been there. The path was steep, the ground damp under my feet, and the tree branches seemed to bend over me, as if trying to stop me from going further. But I kept going. Among the weathered tombstones, I found his name, Callan Virelli, my friend, my comrade, my guilt. I stood there for a long time, saying nothing, just looking, just remembering. Everything came rushing back, the smell of gunpowder, the screams of the wounded, Callan's face begging me to come back. Why can't I ever forget those parts? I returned home carrying something different. Not relief, not yet, but something. I opened the diary again, started reading more carefully with less fear. He wrote about us, about what we dreamed of doing when the war was over. He talked about a place where he wanted to live, a house by the sea, a child he hadn't yet had, simple things, things he thought he'd have a right to. And I realized, with a tightness in my chest, that he never imagined he wouldn't make it out alive. That even in the middle of hell, he held on to faith in a future. Something I'd abandoned long ago. That's when I started writing too. Not with the intention of telling a story, not with the idea of leaving something behind, just to get it out, to organize my thoughts before they suffocated me. I wrote about the day I met him, about the stupid laughs we shared in the barracks, about the cold we felt before each attack. I wrote about the moment I gave the order to retreat. I wrote about what I saw afterward, when I went back and found only blood and silence. I wrote about how much I hate myself for being here and him not. And strangely, as I wrote, it felt like I was burying a part of myself beside him. A part that insisted on staying alive, suffering, punishing me every day. That night I slept, a heavy, dreamless sleep, no voices. For the first time in years I managed to close my eyes and let my body rest. When I woke up, the pain was still there, the guilt still existed. But there was something new too, a small crack in the wall I'd built around myself. I don't know if it was hope, maybe it was just exhaustion, but maybe, just maybe, it was. The first step toward letting the past be the past, toward stopping carrying so many ghosts on my back, toward accepting that I'm alive, not by chance, not by mistake, but because somehow I managed to endure. And maybe now, finally, I can learn to live with it. I kept reading, day after day. The diary became something like a voice in my head that wasn't mine. A familiar but distant voice, saying things I needed to hear even if it hurt. Callan wrote about everything, about fear, about love, about the feeling of being alive, even when the world seemed determined to erase you. He wrote about me, about how he trusted me more than anyone else, about how he saw me as someone who would survive, who would live, who would tell the stories of those left behind, and that shook me in a way I didn't know was still possible. I started leaving the cabin more often, not out of my own will, but out of necessity. I needed paper, ink, food. But also, and this scared me to admit, I needed to feel like I still belonged to this world. The streets of Black Hollow remained narrow, the familiar faces still avoided my gaze, but I didn't run anymore. I faced them, let them see the man I was. Not the hero some might have imagined, nor the monster I sometimes believed I was. Just a man carrying scars no one could see, but that bled every day. It was on one of those trips to the village that I met someone I didn't expect to see, someone I thought I'd never see again. Dane, my old sergeant, old now, white hair stooped back, but eyes still sharp as a freshly forged blade. He was sitting on a wooden bench in front of the hardware store, sipping a hot drink and staring at nothing. When he saw me, he didn't smile, didn't look surprised either. It was as if he already knew I'd come back, as if he'd been waiting for me all this time. "Elias," he said simply, "still remember me?" I replied, unsure if I wanted to hear the answer. He took a slow sip, as if weighing each word before letting it out. "I remember every man I lost," he said, "even the ones still breathing." I sat beside him, not out of friendship, not out of nostalgia, but because for the first time I felt like I could talk to someone who understood, who knew what it was like to carry the weight of decisions with no good answers. We talked for hours about the war, about those who were gone, about what it means to be the last one standing. He didn't try to comfort me, didn't tell me I should forgive myself. He just listened, and then in a low voice, he said something that stuck with me. "You're not the only one who survived, Elias. You're just the only one who insists on paying for everyone who didn't come back." That hit me like thunder, because it was true. I wasn't just carrying my own guilt. I was carrying the pain of all of them, the responsibility for choices they didn't get to make. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to understand that living wasn't a punishment. It was a chance, one I didn't yet know how to use, but that I was starting to consider. That night I went home and kept writing. But not just about the past. I wrote about that conversation, about what Dane had said, about how maybe I could find a purpose beyond the pain, And that's when, for the first time, I felt like I wasn't writing just to forget. I was writing to remember, to honor, to move forward. I started visiting Diane more often, not every day. I wasn't ready for that yet, but little by little, our conversations became a kind of anchor, something solid in the constant storm that was my mind. He never pressured me, never asked how I was. He only spoke when I spoke first. And even then, just sitting beside him was enough to feel like I wasn't completely alone. It was strange to think that. I'd spent so long carrying loneliness like a shield, thinking it was all I deserved. And now, without me fully realizing, it's something inside me was starting to open, slowly, with fear, but opening. It was during one of those visits that Mara showed up. She was coming down the main street with a basket in her hands, her hair tied in a loose bun, her eyes fixed on the ground ahead. When she saw us there, she stopped. For a moment, I thought she'd keep walking, like she always did. But she didn't. Instead, she took a deep breath and came toward us. "You're still here," she said, looking straight at me. "Seems like it," I replied, unsure what tone to use. She glanced at Dane. "Has he told you anything?" Dane shook. "His head. Doesn't need to. I know enough." Mara turned her eyes back to me, and this time there was something different in them. Not hatred, not forgiveness either. Something closer to curiosity, or maybe exhaustion. Exhaustion from carrying resentment, from feeding bitterness. "Did you know he died screaming your name?" she said, low but firm. I swallowed hard. "I know." "Then why didn't you ever come back?" Her question cut deeper than I expected, not because it was cruel, but because it was fair. I thought I began but had to stop. Breathe, start again. "I thought I didn't have the right, that I couldn't face you after what I did." "What did you do, Elias?" she asked, and there was pain in her voice. So much pain. "I survived," I said simply. She stared at me for long seconds, then let out a heavy sigh. "You think that's a crime?" "Sometimes," I admitted. She shook her head. "Then you should stop punishing yourself like you're the only one who suffered." She turned her back and walked away. No goodbye, no tears. But something about her seemed lighter, and something in me did too. That night I went home, and for the first time I didn't write about death. I wrote about her, about Mara, about the way she spoke, how her eyes shone even full of anger. I wrote about how much she'd changed and how much she still reminded me of the woman I loved. And I wrote about myself, about how, no matter how much I tried to deny it, I still wanted to live. Not for redemption, not for forgiveness, but for something so simple I'd almost forgotten its name: desire. The desire to wake up and not have to fight every second of the day. The desire to look at someone without feeling shame. The desire to exist without guilt. The next morning, I found a boy at the cabin door. Young, 17, maybe 18, clean. Face, trembling hands, scared eyes, said he knew who I was, that he'd heard stories, that he needed to learn, that he'd be drafted in weeks and wanted to know how to survive. I stared at him for a long time, saying nothing, because suddenly I was seeing myself, a boy who didn't know what war was, who still believed he could come out of it whole, who still believed in heroes, and I didn't want to teach him. I didn't want to turn that boy into another ghost walking. But then I remembered Callan's words. I remembered the diary. I remembered Dane. I remembered Mara. And more than anything, I remembered myself, the boy I once was, the promise I made to myself before it all began, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. "Come in," I said, stepping away from the door. He came in, and I knew, in that moment, that my war wouldn't end with me. But maybe, maybe it could end with something good. I never thought I'd teach someone to fight, not because I didn't know how, but because every strike, every movement, every tactic was a vivid reminder of how many times I'd killed, how many times I'd survived, How many times I'd watched others not get that chance. And now, here I was, facing a boy who was still afraid of his own shadow, trying to prepare him for something I'd never wished on anyone, not even myself. We started slowly, just exercises at first, running, endurance, balance. He complained, got tired quickly, fell. I didn't help him up, not out of cruelty, but because I knew that out there no one would. One day, after weeks of this, he asked me, "Why do you do this?" "Because someone has to show you how to come back," I replied. He looked at me confused. "You think I'll come back?" "I don't know," I said honestly, "but if you do, you'll want to know why." That's when I started to notice something inside me I hadn't felt in a long time. Responsibility. Not the kind that weighs like guilt, but the kind that gives meaning. The kind that makes you wake up in the morning and remember that your existence still matters to someone. That your knowledge, your scars, your pain, all of it could serve a purpose beyond suffering. It could serve to protect. Mara showed up at the cabin a few days later, without warning, without an apparent reason. She just walked in, left a basket with fresh bread and some fruit on the table, and looked around, as if trying to figure out who I was now. Or maybe who I could still be. "You seem different," she said finally. "I feel different," I admitted. She turned to me. "The boy. Is that why?" "It's part of it," I replied. She sighed. "You can't save him, Elias." "I know," I said. "I just want to give him a reason to try." She didn't respond, just nodded. Then, before leaving, she said, "Callan would have liked to see this." Those words hit me like a punch to the chest, because it was the first time someone mentioned Callan without anger, without judgment, just with acceptance, with affection. And it was also the first time I heard someone say I was doing something right, something good. That night I read the diary again, once more. This time I didn't look for the parts that hurt me. I looked for the ones that gave me strength, the ones that spoke of the future, of hope, of purpose. And for the first time I wrote something new, not about the war, not about death. I wrote about the boy, about Mara, about Dain, about what it meant to feel once again that I belonged to this world. I wrote, "Maybe I never deserved to live, but now at least I'll try to deserve being here." I stopped visiting the cemetery as often, not because I'd stopped remembering them, but because, for the first time, I didn't need to keep repeating names to feel human. They were still with me, of course they were. In every step I took, in every word I wrote, in every lesson I passed on to the boy. But now I didn't go there to ask for forgiveness. I went to give thanks, to remember. To say that, even after everything, I was still here, that I was still breathing, that I was still feeling. It was during one of those visits that I noticed something different in my heart. A lighter weight. Not gone, never completely gone, but lighter, as if years of guilt had started to wear down, like a stone under the constant touch of water. For so long, I thought it was my duty to suffer. That, for having survived, I deserved to carry everyone else's scars too. That my punishment was to live without peace, without purpose. But now I saw it more clearly. They didn't want that for me. None of them did. Callan wrote that several times. Said that if he couldn't make it back, he hoped I would do it. For both of us. That I would live enough for all of us. That I would tell our stories. That I wouldn't let the world forget us. And maybe that was the greatest lesson of all. Not redemption, not forgiveness, but acceptance, accepting that I'm alive, accepting that it doesn't erase what I did or what I lost, but it also doesn't condemn me forever. I went home that night and picked up the diary again for the last time. I read the final pages slowly, as if I knew that after this I wouldn't need it anymore. It was strange how those words had guided me this far. It had been a mirror, a guide, a friend, and now it felt like its work was done. I stored it in an old wooden box I found under the bed. Along with it, I placed my own notes. The letters I never sent, Faded photos of the platoon, a button from my old uniform, a bullet I never got to use. I closed the box and took it to the cabin's attic, left it in a dark corner where dust was already starting to settle. Not to forget, but to let it rest. To understand that there comes a moment when you have to stop sifting through the ashes and let the memories stay where they belong, in the past. The next morning, I woke up before the sun rose. The sky was still dark, but there was a faint glow. On the horizon, I went to the forest like I used to, but this time I didn't walk to escape. I walked to feel, to hear the wind rustling the leaves, to feel my feet touching the ground, to realize that I could still breathe deeply and not feel pain. Just cold air entering and leaving my lungs. Just life. When I got back, Mara was waiting for me on the porch, with a cup of hot tea in her hand. She didn't say anything at first, just looked at me, and I, for the first time, managed to look back without feeling like a monster. "You look lighter," she said finally. "Maybe I am," I replied. She smiled faintly. "It's good to see that." I nodded. "It's good to feel it." We sat together, drank tea, talked about simple things, about the weather, about the boy, about what we planned to do with the rest of the day. Nothing profound, nothing dramatic, just conversation, just company. And in that comfortable silence, in that rare tranquility, I understood. I don't need to be saved. I don't need absolute forgiveness. I don't need to erase everything I've lived through. I just need a reason to keep going. And by some miracle, I had finally found one. That night, Mara and I stayed on the porch for a long time. The sky was clear, full of stars that seemed as distant as the man I used to be. She didn't talk much. Neither did I. We were just there, together. And that was enough. After so long alone, I'd forgotten how simple it was to be near someone without having to explain anything, without having to justify my silence, my pain, my weight. It was she who broke the silence first. "Why didn't you ever come back?" I looked at her. It was the same question she'd asked before, but this time there was less anger in it, more curiosity, more exhaustion, more truth. I began but had to stop, breathe deeply. The words didn't come easily. They never did. When they were about myself, I thought I didn't have the right, that after what happened, I couldn't just show up and pretend I still belonged to all this, that I didn't deserve to be here. She turned to me, her eyes fixed on mine. "Do you think I deserved to be here?" "Of course you did," I replied without hesitation. "Then why should I deserve it? And you shouldn't." That caught me off guard, not because I hadn't thought about it before, but because no one had ever said it out loud. No one had ever put my guilt under such clear, obvious light. "Because I chose to walk away from that battlefield," I said quietly. "While he stayed behind." "He knew that," she replied, "and he didn't blame you." "That doesn't change how I feel." "No, it doesn't," she admitted. "But maybe it's time to accept that you'll feel this forever. And still move forward." I stayed silent for a long time, looking at my hands, at the scars on my knuckles, at the knots formed by time, by fighting, by life. I wanted to tell her I'd get better, that one day I'd wake up and not carry this pain anymore, but I couldn't lie. Not to her, not anymore. "Sometimes I wake up at night," I began, surprising even myself, "and for a second I forget. I forget where I am. I forget who I am. And then I remember, and it's like everything comes rushing back at once. The screams, the blood, the smell of wet earth mixed with gunpowder. And I'm trapped again. Trapped there, trapped in him." Mara didn't say anything, just listened. "I know he doesn't hate me," I continued. "I know he wanted me to live, but I never could, until now." She placed her hand on mine, light, cautious, as if afraid I'd shatter at her touch. "And now?" I took a deep breath. "Now I want to try. Not for him, not for you, but for me. Because for the first time, I think I might be worth it." Even with all the bad things I carry, even with everything I've done, I think I might be worth it." She squeezed my hand. It was the first real gesture of affection she'd given me since I returned. And it was strange how that felt important. As if, with that single touch, she was saying I still belonged to this world, that I was still human, that I could still feel. And that in itself was already something. We stayed there for a while longer, without talking, without needing to, just breathing, living. And somehow that felt more significant than any farewell I'd ever given, more important than any promise I'd ever made, because for the first time I wasn't fighting against myself. I was letting life in, slowly, carefully, but in. The next day, the boy came to train as usual, and I taught him. Not just strikes, not just defenses. I taught him how to breathe under pressure, how to keep a cool head, how to look at someone and know if they're about to attack. And more than anything, I taught him how to remember who he is. Even when the world tries to take that away from him. When we finished, he asked me, "What if I don't come back?" I looked at him, straight in the eyes. "Come back, no matter how, no matter why. Come back." He nodded. "And if I can't?" "Then make it worth it," I paused. "Make your name mean something," he smiled. A weak but sincere smile. "I'll try." "That's all anyone can do," I replied. And as he walked away, I realized I don't need to be saved. I don't need absolute forgiveness. I don't need to forget. I just need to keep walking, keep living, keep trying, and maybe, just maybe, that's enough. On the morning of the boy's departure, I went with him to the enlistment post. It was an old, almost abandoned place near the main road, where army buses came to pick up those who still had the courage to fight. The sky was grey, heavy with the promise of rain, and the wind blew softly through the trees, carrying the smell of wet earth. A familiar smell, an old smell, the same smell that hung over the battlefields. The boy walked beside me without saying anything, just looked ahead, fists clenched, trying to seem stronger than he felt. I knew what that was like. I knew what it was to pretend you're ready to leave everything behind, that you're prepared to come back different, that you'll survive. We stopped before reaching the entrance. He turned to me, hesitant. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For teaching me, for listening, for not lying and saying it would be easy." I smiled faintly. If someone had done that for me, maybe I'd have been easier to live with. He nodded. There was no fear in his eyes. There was respect, determination, and something else, hope. "I'll come back," he said firmly. "I know," I replied. He hugged me. It was quick, unexpected, but real, and for the first time in a long time I didn't flinch. I let it happen. I let someone touch me without feeling dirty inside. I let life remind me that I could still feel warmth. When he boarded the bus, I stayed there for a while, watching as the vehicle filled with young men carrying heavy backpacks, and eyes too, tired for their age. Some smiled, others looked at the ground. All were heading towards something I knew all too well, something with no return, something that changes you forever. And when the bus left, kicking up dust on the wet ground, I didn't feel anger, or guilt, or suffocating pain. I just felt longing. Longing for a time when I too believed I could make a difference. Longing for a boy who still had unbroken dreams. Longing for a world that still made sense. I walked back home slowly, no rush. For the first time I was in no hurry. There were no ghosts chasing me, no voices in my head demanding explanations, no diary to read, no letters to write. Just me, alone but not lonely, alone but whole. I entered the cabin and closed the door. I picked up the notebook where I wrote my thoughts, flipped through some pages. The first ones were dark, full of pain and self-loathing. The last ones spoke of hope, of Mara, of the boy, of me, of someone who, against all odds, decided to keep living even without understanding why. I wrote one last page, just one. I should be dead, but I'm not, And for some reason I'm still here, so I'll live. Not for redemption, not for forgiveness, not for justice. I'll live because I can still breathe, because I can still feel, because even after everything, I'm still capable of loving, of teaching, of remembering, of moving forward. I closed the notebook, put it in a drawer, not to forget, but to let it rest, like the rest of my memories. Some good, some bad, all true. I left the cabin and headed to the forest. The sun was starting to disappear behind the mountains, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple. The wind blew stronger, and I breathed deeply, slowly, fully, as if it were the first time, and for the first time in years, I smiled. Not because I'd overcome everything, not because I'd forgotten the past, but because I'd chosen to live with it.